They thought working at a gas station made me worthless. They had no idea I owned the entire chain. My name is Madison Hayes, and for 28 years, I've been the family disappointment. The daughter who never amounted to anything. The one they whisper about at family gatherings, shaking their heads with that look of pity mixed with embarrassment. You see, in the Hayes family, there are two categories of children: the golden ones and the forgotten ones. My younger brother Derek? He's pure gold. 25 years old, fresh MBA from Northwestern, designer suits, and a confidence that could fill stadiums. Me? I'm the one who works at Murphy's gas station on Route 47, wearing a polo shirt with my name embroidered on the pocket. At least, that's what they think. The pattern started early. When Derek was 8 and I was 11, he broke Mom's favorite vase playing football in the house. Somehow, it became my fault for not watching him properly. When he crashed Dad's car at 16, I got lectured about being a bad influence on him. When he barely graduated high school while I was valedictorian, the family celebrated his improvement and forgot to mention my achievement entirely. Derek got the college fund. I got a part-time job. Derek got the new car for graduation. I got the hand-me-down that broke down twice a week. Derek got praised for C's. I got ignored for A's. But the gas station? That's where the real story begins. 5 years ago, my grandmother, my mom's mother, who never quite fit the Hayes family mold either, left me something in her will. It wasn't much, just a small gas station she'd inherited from her second husband. My parents actually laughed when the lawyer read it out loud. "Well, at least Madison will have job security," Dad had said, and everyone chuckled like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. What they didn't know was that Grandma Rose had also left me her financial advisor's contact information and a letter that would change everything. The letter was simple. "Madison, honey, they never saw your potential, but I did. This station isn't just a building, it's your foundation. Build something they can't ignore." So I did. I started working at Murphy's gas station 12 hours a day, learning every aspect of the business. Inventory management, customer service, vendor relationships, profit margins. I watched how the morning rush worked, which products sold best, why some locations thrived while others struggled, and slowly, very quietly, I began to expand. First, I bought the struggling station 2 towns over, then another. Each purchase was strategic, each location carefully chosen. I never told my family. Why would I? They'd already decided I was a failure. Derek, meanwhile, was living his best life. College parties, spring break trips funded by Mom and Dad, internships that Dad's golf buddies arranged for him. He'd come home for holidays talking about his network and his trajectory, using business buzzwords he'd learned in his marketing classes. "Madison's still at that gas station," he'd tell his friends, loud enough for me to hear. "Some people just aren't cut out for bigger things, you know?" I'd smile and nod, checking my phone where Marcus Sterling, my CEO, would be updating me on our latest acquisition. By Derek's senior year of college, I owned 14 stations across 3 states. By the time he graduated, I owned 23. When he started his MBA program, I hit 35. The beautiful irony? The company Derek landed his dream job with after graduation, Sterling Energy Consulting, was the firm I'd hired to manage my business operations. Marcus Sterling wasn't just my employee, he was my friend, my business partner, and the only person outside of my accountant who knew the truth about quiet little Madison Hayes. Which brings us to today, Jessica's wedding. My cousin Jessica always liked me, probably because she understood what it felt like to be overlooked. Her mother, my Aunt Linda, was Dad's sister, and she'd inherited the same Hayes family talent for playing favorites. Jessica was getting married to a doctor named Michael at the Riverside Country Club, the fanciest venue in our county. I'd driven there in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, wearing a simple blue dress I'd bought at Target. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I'd learned that blending in made life easier. Derek arrived in his leased BMW wearing a $1,000 suit, his girlfriend Amber attached to his arm like an expensive accessory. The ceremony was beautiful. Jessica looked radiant, Michael seemed genuinely in love, and for a moment, I forgot about family dynamics and just enjoyed celebrating love. But then came the reception, and with it, the familiar Hayes family hierarchy. Derek had somehow appointed himself the unofficial master of ceremonies. While the actual wedding party was taking photos, he'd grabbed a microphone and started giving an impromptu speech about family success stories. "You know," he said, his voice carrying across the elegant ballroom, "I look around this room and I see so many examples of what hard work and ambition can achieve. My parents who built Dad's construction company from nothing. My beautiful girlfriend Amber who just got promoted to senior marketing analyst. And myself, fresh out of Northwestern with my MBA, about to start with Sterling Energy Consulting next month." The crowd was polite, nodding along, probably wondering why this wasn't the best man speaking. I was standing near the back, close to the exit, hoping to avoid attention. But Derek wasn't done. "Of course, not everyone finds their calling right away," he continued, his eyes finding mine across the room. "My sister Madison, for example, she's been working at the same gas station for years now. But hey, honest work is honest work, right? Not everyone can be ambitious." The words hit like physical blows. A few people turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from pity to secondhand embarrassment. I felt my face flush, but I stayed quiet. I'd perfected the art of staying quiet. "Derek," Jessica's voice came through the microphone as she grabbed it from him. "Why don't we let the actual wedding party speak?" But Derek wasn't ready to give up his moment. As Jessica reached for the microphone, I found myself walking forward, not to cause a scene, but to rescue my cousin from her obvious discomfort. I just wanted to help diffuse the situation. "Oh, look, Madison's coming up," Derek announced with fake enthusiasm. "Maybe she wants to share some wisdom about perseverance." I reached the edge of the small stage area, extending my hand to help Derek down so Jessica could have her microphone back. Instead, he placed his hand on my shoulder and pushed. Not hard enough to really hurt me, but hard enough to send me stumbling backward in my heels. "Stay in the back where you belong," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "This is about success stories." The room went silent. I caught myself from falling, straightening my dress and looking up at my brother's triumphant face. That's when my father's voice cut through the silence. "She still works at a gas station," Dad called out from his table, laughing like it was the punchline to a joke. Several people at his table chuckled along, probably more from discomfort than actual amusement. But here's the thing about being underestimated for so long. You learn to control your reactions. You learn to smile when you want to scream. You learn to breathe when you want to break down. And sometimes you learn to recognize the perfect moment when everything changes. I smiled. Not the fake, placating smile I'd perfected over the years, but a real smile, the kind of smile that comes when you know something no one else knows. I pulled out my phone and sent a text message. One word: now. The response was immediate. ETA 3 minutes. "Sorry, boss, traffic was worse than expected." I put my phone away and looked up at Derek, who was still standing on the stage, looking pleased with himself. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom. "This is about success stories." Derek's smile faltered slightly. Something in my tone must have warned him that this moment wasn't going the way he'd planned. That's when we heard it, the distant sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air. At first, people ignored it. Helicopters weren't uncommon around Riverside Country Club. Wealthy members sometimes arrived that way for important events. But the sound was getting closer. And closer. The room's attention shifted from the awkward family drama to the windows. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the golf course, we could see it approaching. A sleek black helicopter with Sterling Energy emblazoned on the side in silver letters. "Is that?" someone whispered. "Why is it landing here?" another voice asked. Derek's face had gone from triumphant to confused. Dad was squinting out the window, trying to read the writing on the helicopter. Jessica and Michael stood frozen, probably wondering if this was going to overshadow their wedding. The helicopter touched down on the 18th fairway, its blades creating a dramatic windstorm that sent cocktail napkins flying and made the crystal glasses on nearby tables ring like tiny bells. The engine wound down, the blades slowed, and the side door opened. Marcus Sterling stepped out. I watched the recognition dawn on faces throughout the room. Marcus Sterling, CEO of Sterling Energy Corporation, the man whose photo had been on the cover of Business Weekly just last month. The man who'd been featured in Forbes as one of the 40 under 40 business leaders to watch. The man who'd spoken at Derek's MBA graduation ceremony about innovation and leadership. The man Derek would be working for starting next month. Marcus was wearing his typical weekend attire, dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, and a navy blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled despite the helicopter ride, and he walked across the golf course toward the country club with the confident stride of someone who owned every room he entered, which, in many ways, he did. The ballroom had gone completely silent except for the soft jazz still playing through the sound system. Even the waitstaff had stopped serving, standing frozen with trays in their hands as they watched this unexpected arrival. Derek's mouth was hanging open. I could see him trying to process what was happening. His new boss, the man he'd been name-dropping for months, the CEO he'd been bragging about working with, had just landed at his family wedding. But why? Marcus walked through the country club's main entrance and into the ballroom like he'd been invited. He nodded politely to a few stunned guests, his eyes scanning the room until they found mine. "Madison," he said, his voice warm with familiarity as he approached. "Sorry I'm late, boss. The board meeting ran over." The word boss hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Boss. He'd called me boss. In front of everyone. I watched Derek's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been panic. Dad's laugh had died in his throat. The guests who'd been chuckling at the gas station girl just moments before were now staring at me like I'd transformed into someone completely different, which, in a way, I had. "No problem, Marcus," I replied calmly. "How did the Peterson acquisition go?" "Signed this morning," he said with a grin. "We now own 47 locations across 3 states. The Peterson chain puts us at just over $200 million in annual revenue." The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every stare, every open mouth, every racing mind trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. Derek took a shaky step down from the stage, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Marcus?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What? What's happening here?" Marcus turned to Derek with professional politeness. "Oh, Derek, good to see you again. Looking forward to having you on the team next month." Then he turned back to me. "Madison, should we discuss the Henderson proposal now, or would you prefer to wait until after the celebration?" I looked around the room at all the faces staring at me. My father, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. My mother, who looked like she might faint. Derek, who seemed to be questioning everything he thought he knew about reality. And Jessica, my sweet cousin Jessica, who was the first to break the silence with a delighted laugh. "Madison Hayes," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "You beautiful, mysterious genius. You let them all think that I was just a gas station clerk," I finished for her. "Which technically I am. I do work at a gas station. I just happen to own 47 of them." The revelation hit the room like a tidal wave. I watched as Derek's face went through what I can only describe as the 5 stages of grief in Fast Forward. Denial flickered in his eyes first. This had to be some kind of joke, some elaborate prank. Then anger as his jaw clenched and his hands formed fists. Bargaining came next as I saw him mentally scrambling for explanations that would make this make sense. Depression followed quickly, his shoulders sagging as the weight of his mistake crashed down on him. And finally, a kind of hollow acceptance as he realized that everything he thought he knew about his family, about himself, about success, had just been turned upside down. But Derek wasn't the only one processing this bombshell. The entire room was buzzing with whispered conversations, guests pulling out their phones to Google Madison Hayes Sterling Energy, trying to piece together how the quiet girl in the Target dress had somehow become the boss of one of the region's most successful energy companies. Marcus, bless him, handled the situation with his usual professional grace. "Perhaps we should give the bride and groom their moment back," he suggested quietly. "We can catch up properly later." But Jessica, still holding her microphone, wasn't ready to let this moment pass. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom, "I think Madison deserves a proper introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, my cousin Madison Hayes, CEO and founder of Hayes Energy Corporation." The applause that followed was confused but genuine. People weren't sure what they were clapping for exactly, but they knew they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. As the crowd began to murmur and cluster into small groups discussing what they'd just seen, I found myself surrounded by a bubble of space. People wanted to approach, but they weren't sure how. After all, 5 minutes ago, I'd been the family disappointment. Now I was apparently more successful than anyone in the room. Derek was the first to break through that bubble. He approached slowly, like someone walking toward a wild animal that might bolt or attack at any moment. "Madison," he said, his voice hoarse. I don't understand. How is this possible? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at my younger brother, this man who'd spent his entire adult life looking down on me, who'd just publicly humiliated me in front of 100 people, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not vindication, but a deep, bone-deep sadness. "When would I have told you, Derek?" I asked gently. "Between the times you called me a loser, or maybe during one of those family dinners where you talked about your business classes while everyone ignored the fact that I was actually running a business?" "But the gas station," he stammered. "Is where it all started," I explained. "Grandma Rose left me Murphy's gas station 5 years ago, remember? You all laughed about it. Dad said at least I'd have job security." Dad. I'd almost forgotten he was there, but now I could see him pushing through the crowd toward us, Mom close behind. His face was red, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "Madison Elizabeth Hayes," he said, using my full name like he had when I was in trouble as a child. "What is the meaning of this? If you're really—" He struggled with the words, unable to quite voice the reality of the situation. "If I'm really what, Dad? Successful? Rich? Everything you always told Derek he could be, but never thought I was capable of?" Marcus stepped closer, sensing the family tension. "Mr. Hayes," he said respectfully, "your daughter is one of the most brilliant business minds I've ever worked with. When she hired me 3 years ago, Hayes Energy was a small regional chain. Under her leadership, we've become the 3rd largest independent gas station network in the Midwest." "Hired you?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "You hired him?" "Yes, Mom. I hired Marcus to be my CEO so I could focus on strategic expansion. Turns out, running a multi-million-dollar company is pretty time-consuming." The crowd had grown quiet again, everyone straining to hear this family drama unfold. I realized we were creating a scene at Jessica's wedding, and the last thing I wanted was to ruin her special day. "You know what?" I said, taking a step back. "This isn't the time or place for this conversation. Jessica, Michael, congratulations. You deserve all the happiness in the world." I started to walk away, but Derek grabbed my arm. "Wait," he said urgently. "You can't just— We need to talk about this, about everything." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. For the first time in my adult life, I saw something in Derek's eyes I'd never seen before. Respect. And fear. "Actually," Marcus interjected smoothly, "Derek, since we're all here, there is something work-related we should discuss." Derek's face went pale. "Work-related? Well, you start with Sterling Energy Consulting next month, right? I should probably mention that Hayes Energy Corporation is actually our biggest client. About 60% of our consulting revenue comes from Madison's account." The implication hung in the air like a sword over Derek's head. His new job, his new career, his entire future. It all depended on the sister he'd just publicly humiliated. Derek's voice cracked. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," I said quietly. "You never asked what I did, remember? You just assumed." Dad stepped forward, his face cycling through a dozen different expressions. Madison, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No, Dad, I interrupted. There hasn't been a misunderstanding. There's been 28 years of you and Mom treating Derek like he was destined for greatness while treating me like I was destined for nothing. The only misunderstanding was yours about who I really am. But if you had all this money, why didn't you help the family? Why didn't you tell us? Mom's voice was plaintive, confused. Help the family with what? You never said you needed help. And when would I have told you? During one of Derek's graduation parties that I wasn't invited to? Or maybe during one of those family dinners where Derek talked about his internships while you all acted like I didn't exist? The truth was more complicated than that, of course. There had been times I'd wanted to tell them, moments when Derek's arrogance or Dad's dismissiveness had made me want to throw my success in their faces. But every time I'd come close, I'd remembered Grandma Rose's advice. Real power doesn't need to announce itself, honey. It just is. Jessica appeared at my elbow, having handed off her microphone to someone else. Madison, she said quietly, I had no idea, but I'm so proud of you, and I'm so sorry they treated you like that. Don't apologize for them, Jess. Today is your day. I don't want this drama to overshadow your wedding. Are you kidding? She laughed. This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened at a Hayes family gathering. Do you know how many boring family dinners I've sat through listening to Derek talk about his trajectory? This is perfect. Despite everything, I found myself laughing. Okay, but can we at least move this conversation somewhere more private? Your guests didn't sign up for a family therapy session. Marcus, ever the professional, stepped in. There's a private dining room upstairs that the club manager offered us. Perhaps the family could continue this discussion there? 20 minutes later, we were seated around a mahogany conference table in the club's executive dining room. Me, Derek, Mom, Dad, Marcus, and Jessica, who'd insisted on coming for moral support. The rest of the wedding guests were back in the ballroom, probably having the time of their lives dissecting what they'd just witnessed. Derek was the first to speak. Madison, I owe you an apology. What I did down there, what I said, it was inexcusable. Yes, I agreed simply. It was. He flinched at my directness, but continued. I don't understand why you kept this secret. I don't understand how you built all this without any of us knowing. But I know I was wrong to treat you the way I did. Were you, though? I asked. Wrong, I mean. You treated me exactly the way Mom and Dad taught you to treat me, like I was less than you, like I was someone to be pitied and dismissed. Dad's face reddened again. Now that's not fair, Madison. We never taught Derek to treat you badly. Didn't you? I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app where I'd been keeping track of family interactions for years. Christmas 2019. Derek announces his acceptance to Northwestern. The family toasts his success. I mention that I've been promoted to assistant manager at Murphy's. Dad says, well, someone has to pump gas, I suppose. Christmas 2020. Derek talks about his internship with Goldman Sachs. I mention that I'm taking business classes at night. Mom says, that's nice, dear, and immediately changes the subject back to Derek. You kept notes? Mom asked, looking stricken. I kept notes because I started to think I was going crazy. I thought maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe I was imagining the way you all treated me. But the notes don't lie. I scrolled through entry after entry. Family dinners where Derek's opinions were solicited and mine were ignored. Holidays where his achievements were celebrated and mine were dismissed. Birthday parties where the conversation somehow always ended up being about Derek's latest accomplishment. Madison, honey, Mom said, tears in her eyes. We never meant to make you feel that way. Intent doesn't matter, Mom. Impact does. The impact was that I felt like a stranger in my own family. The impact was that I learned to keep my successes to myself because I knew you wouldn't care. Marcus, who'd been quietly observing this family therapy session, finally spoke up. If I may, he said diplomatically, I think Madison's success speaks to her character. She could have used her wealth to force your attention or respect. Instead, she chose to prove herself through her actions, not her bank account. But why the secrecy? Derek asked. Why not just tell us? I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Underneath his arrogance and his golden child confidence, Derek looked lost. Like finding out his older sister was more successful than him had fundamentally shaken his understanding of himself. Because I needed to know I could do it without you, I said honestly. I needed to know that my worth wasn't dependent on your approval or recognition. I needed to build something that was entirely mine. And you did, Jessica said softly. Madison, what you've accomplished is incredible. It is, Dad admitted grudgingly. I still don't understand how you managed it all without us knowing, but it's impressive. Thank you, I said, though his praise felt hollow after 28 years of criticism. Derek leaned forward in his chair. Madison, about my job with Sterling Energy. Am I going to lose it because of what happened today? I studied his face for a long moment. Do you want to lose it? No, he said quickly. No, I really don't. Not just because it's a good job, but because I want the chance to prove that I can be the kind of person who deserves to work for someone like Marcus, someone like you. Then don't lose it, I said simply. Marcus hired you based on your qualifications, not your family connections. Your job is safe as long as you do good work. Relief flooded Derek's face. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me. Thank Marcus for giving you the opportunity, and thank yourself if you succeed in it. We talked for another hour. Not yelling, not accusing, just talking. Really talking, maybe for the first time in our adult lives. Mom cried. Dad apologized stiffly but sincerely. Derek asked thoughtful questions about my business and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. It wasn't a magic cure for 28 years of family dysfunction, but it was a start. As the sun began to set outside the club's windows, painting the golf course in shades of gold and amber, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. Not just in my family's perception of me, but in my own sense of myself. For years, I'd carried the pain of their dismissal like a weight on my chest. I'd built my empire partly to prove them wrong, partly to prove to myself that I was worth something. But sitting in that room, watching my father struggle to reconcile his assumptions with reality, watching Derek grapple with his own identity crisis, I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. I'd built something beautiful and powerful and entirely my own. I'd created jobs for hundreds of people, provided an essential service to thousands of customers, and built a company that would outlast all of us. Whether my family recognized that or not didn't change the reality of what I'd accomplished. We should get back to the reception, Jessica said eventually. People are going to think I abandoned my own wedding. We made our way back downstairs, where the party was in full swing. But there was a different energy in the room now. People approached me cautiously, with new respect in their voices. Distant relatives who'd never bothered to learn my name suddenly wanted to chat about business and investments. Derek stayed close to me for the rest of the evening, not in his usual domineering way, but like someone trying to learn a new language. He asked about my business strategy, about my plans for expansion, about the challenges of managing such rapid growth. For the first time in our lives, he listened to my answers. Madison, he said during a quiet moment while we watched Jessica and Michael's first dance. I want you to know that I'm going to work harder than I've ever worked in my life. At Sterling Energy, I mean. I don't want you to regret giving me this opportunity. I'm not giving you anything, Derek, I replied. Marcus hired you because he believed you could do the job. Whether you succeed or fail is entirely up to you. But knowing that we're connected through the business, it changes things. It doesn't change anything, I said firmly. You're still Derek Hayes, recent MBA graduate with potential but no real-world experience. I'm still Madison Hayes, your sister who happens to run a large company. The only thing that's changed is what you know about me, not who either of us actually is. He nodded slowly, processing this. I have a lot to learn. We all do. Later that evening, after the bouquet had been thrown and the cake had been cut, after the toasts had been made and the dancing had wound down, I found myself standing alone on the club's terrace, looking out over the golf course where Marcus's helicopter still sat like a sleeping mechanical bird. Dad joined me at the railing. For a few minutes, we stood in silence, watching the last guests trickle out to their cars. "I failed you," he said finally. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to minimize his responsibility, to make this easier for him. But I'd spent too many years making things easier for my family at my own expense. "Yes," I said quietly. "You did." He nodded, accepting the judgment. "I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix the past, Dad, but you can choose to do better going forward." "How?" I turned to look at him. This man who'd shaped so much of my early understanding of myself and my worth. "You can start by seeing me as I am, not as who you thought I was. You can start by treating Derek and me as equals instead of as a success story and a cautionary tale. You can start by understanding that your love and respect shouldn't be conditional on achievement. Your mother and I, we thought we were motivating you. We thought if Derek had more advantages, more opportunities, he'd be successful. We didn't realize we were telling you that you didn't deserve the same chances." "I know," I said, "and maybe that would have worked if Derek had actually needed motivation. But he didn't. He needed humility, and I didn't need motivation. I needed support. What can I do now?" I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd given my father in years. "You can ask me about my business at family dinners. You can stop acting surprised when I have opinions about things. You can treat me like the successful adult I am instead of the disappointing child you remember. And you'll give us a chance to do better?" I considered this. "I'll give you a chance to try. But Dad, I'm not going to pretend the last 28 years didn't happen. I'm not going to go back to being quiet little Madison who absorbs everyone else's assumptions about her limitations. This is who I am now." "I understand. As we walked back inside together, I realized that this wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning. My family would have to learn to relate to me as an equal, and I would have to learn to be in relationship with them without sacrificing my own sense of self-worth. Derek found me as I was preparing to leave. "Madison, wait," he called out, jogging across the parking lot in his expensive shoes. "What is it?" "I just wanted to say what you did tonight, not humiliating me when you could have, not destroying my career when you had every right to. That took a kind of strength I don't think I have." "You might surprise yourself," I replied. "But Derek, I need you to understand something. I didn't save your job tonight out of sisterly affection. I saved it because destroying your career wouldn't have made me feel better, and it wouldn't have been good for business. If you want our relationship to change, it's going to take more than one apology." "I know," he said. "And I'm willing to put in the work, if you're willing to let me try." I looked at this man who'd been my tormentor, my competitor, my little brother. "We'll see," I said finally. As I drove home in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, which I kept not because I couldn't afford better, but because it reminded me where I'd started, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Grandma Rose just before she died. "Madison, honey," she'd said, holding my hand with her paper-thin fingers, "success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And you, my dear, are going to do extraordinary things." She'd been right, of course. But what she hadn't told me was that success would change not just how others saw me, but how I saw myself. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly free. Free from the need for my family's approval. Free from the weight of their low expectations. Free to be exactly who I was. Tomorrow, I would wake up as Madison Hayes, CEO of Hayes Energy Corporation. Not the family disappointment, not the gas station girl, not Derek's less successful older sister. Just me, in all my complicated, powerful, quietly revolutionary glory. And that felt like the best kind of victory there was.